Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to a special Between Takes episode of Missing Frames. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. Normally on Missing Frames, we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. But on the Between Takes episodes, it gives us an opportunity to stretch out beyond the spheres. What's a cosmic stupid thing? The Bene Gesserit spirit calls to us and gives us a chance to do film reviews. I don't know what I'm talking about, but you are probably gathering just by the audio that this is not your standard episode. I am in a car driving with my wife, Sarah. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
We are on our way to see DUNE Part 2 in IMAX, the 70mm IMAX showing at the Mall of Georgia. And we just got a hankering. What time is it? It's 9:55. It's also daylight savings time is over, I think, or is it now?
It has just begun.
Yes, so either way, I normally don't know what I'm talking about, but doubly so now. I don't know. It's very early, and also it's technically 8:55 a.m., even though it's 9:55 a.m. But all this said, we are going to see DUNE Part 2, which I'm actually very excited about.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah, and it's mainly because people have been so blown away by this movie. Even people who didn't love the first Dune, which I think, got a relatively positive reception, but I didn't love it. I'm not a big Dune fan anyway. How do you feel about Dune in general? Well, you've never read the book, right?
Yeah, I have not read the book. The first viewing, I remember walking away from it and being like, wow, that was really beautiful, and I was kind of bored.
Yeah.
That was my general feeling. So I liked it. I definitely didn't dislike it. But as a viewer who had not read the book, I was kind of confused on some of the political and religious mythology.
As a viewer who did read the book, I am also confused by this.
I think that was something where I was really trying to wrap my head around, some of the political chess they were playing and things, and I would get a little caught up on that. But then I could appreciate, wow, this movie looks good, and the acting is amazing. What a good cast. I really enjoyed it. But I remember walking away and being like, I think I need to see this another time to form a true opinion on the film.
Yeah, I read the book. I really, really wanted to read the book for the longest time. I was even holding off on watching David Lynch's Dune because I wanted to read the book first, and I also wanted to see Denis Villeneuve's movie first. So read the book, then watch that movie. So I had started reading Dune, I think late 2019 or early 2020, because the movie was originally going to come out summer 2020. So I was like, all right, I will finish the first Dune at least, and then I'll be ready to go and watch the movie. And then COVID happened, of course, and the movie was delayed. I think it was pushed all the way to fall or winter of 2020. Or maybe it was 2021. Because remember, Warner Brothers announced, all of our movies are going to be coming out. It was 2021. They pushed it back a year. And they were like, all our movies are going to be on HBO Max simultaneously.
And it did not get a theatrical release?
It did get a theatrical release.
Okay.
So it was just that moment in time where all these streaming services were... Essentially, they put all their eggs in one basket and were like, okay, I guess streaming is the way of the future. The theatrical experience is dying. The movie-going experience is dying. Therefore, we're just going to do that. And that's why Christopher Nolan, got so upset with them and was like, you know what, I'm going to make Oppenheimer with another studio because I believe in the sanctity and the power of cinema and the movie-going experience and the theatrical experience. And Dune kind of got caught in the crossfire where it was slated for a theatrical release, and then COVID happened, and then Warner Brothers decided we're going to put everything on HBO Max the same day that it's in theaters. Shockingly, the movie did pretty well at the box office, considering it didn't make a ton of money, definitely not as much money as I think it would have made otherwise, but it made a small profit. But yeah, I read Dune, and I tried to read it a couple times. I have some friends, some close friends, who are really big Dune fans. I couldn't get into it the first couple times because it is such a technical, weird, politically driven book, and I couldn't connect with the characters really, which kind of extends to Dune Part 1 as well. Like that, as an adaptation, it's pretty solid, and it's the first half of the story. But even then, I was just kind of like, yeah, this feels like I felt when I read the book, which is that I'm not super compelled by anything. It's interesting, but I don't know. Paul just isn't that interesting of a character to me. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I agree. I think I struggle with Paul's journey in the first movie, so I am looking forward to seeing where it goes, because some of it falls a little emotionally flat for some really emotional moments. But yeah, I agree. It was a movie that I enjoyed, but I felt like there was a puzzle piece missing for me. It also was fairly long of a film, and I do feel like I kind of felt the length. Like I felt like there were two plots in the first movie, and almost like we had a middle of the movie ending, and then an ending that wasn't an ending at the end.
It doesn't really have an ending.
I really would love to I know it would be a marathon, but I think watching the two movies together is probably the best cinematic experience you're going to get.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because it clearly, where it ends is it's a pause, and it's like, okay, more to come. It
really feels like that. And part 1 too is, I think by its nature, just an info dump. There's a lot of information. Dune is notoriously hard to adapt, or it's been notoriously hard to adapt. You had David Lynch's adaptation in 1984. That was a pretty, not a major bomb, but kind of a bomb. Didn't do super well with critics. Fans weren't super into it. It's kind of got a cult following, but even David Lynch has disowned that movie and been kind of like, no, don't love it. And then there was like a mini series. There's a lot of information, and they do a pretty decent job in Dune Part 1 of explaining everything. But at the same time, it still feels like a lot of information. And even having read the book, like I can just sense an audience member sitting there and being like, I don't know who that is. I know the pale guys are bad because they're pale and they dress in evil clothes. Although technically,
and they float.
They float, or
that's
whatever
creepy.
that is. And then, well, technically, I guess they have the white battle suits. So
Yeah.
I guess they're not all in black. Technically, the good guys are all in black. They're wearing the still suits. I'm honestly impressed that I've managed to remember so many terms and things from this movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna be like, oh, Paul. I know who Paul is,
and Jessica.
because those are the names I can retain in my brain.
Yes.
But there are a lot of complicated names in here. I need a little dictionary.
Bene Gesserit, Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah, Kwisatz Haderach. That's
yeah.
like I could not. 5 times fast.
Yes.
It was my mind.
That is the dream. If you can do that 5 times fast,
you win.
You win a gold sandworm, a golden sandworm popcorn bucket from AMC.
Oh, the dream.
I know. We're going to Regal. We really are doing this wrong.
We are.
Dune Part 1, I think, suffers from just information overload, and you don't really know. It's not that you don't really know. It does a pretty good job of keeping you engaged, but at the same time, it feels like half a movie, like you were saying. And it's also like there isn't a lot of room to breathe. Like, we don't really sit with these characters long enough to know who they are as people. The performances do a lot of the heavy lifting in that regard. You got some great people in here, like Timothée Chalamet and Oscar Isaac and Josh
Rebecca
Brolin.
Ferguson is so good.
Great. You have Dave Bautista, who's awesome, even though he doesn't get to do a whole lot. You have Jason Momoa, who's always great. You just have this amazing cast who really like pick up the slack and give the film its humanity. But even then, it's kind of like we get really a brief moment between Paul and Duke Leto, and like it's hard to gauge like the relationships, and we don't really know like what Paul's place in all of this is. He's kind of just sort of, you said, a blank slate.
Yeah.
He's kind of a blank slate character, And unlike, I guess, like Luke or maybe like Harry Potter or Frodo, he's kind of just inactive and sort of waiting around until all these bad things happen. And his father is murdered, and the House Atreides is betrayed and destroyed. And he decides, like, okay, my journey now is to avenge my father and take back Arrakis and destroy the Harkonnens and I guess the Emperor. It's not super clear. With Luke you have like, I have to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father and destroy the Death Star. And with Harry you have to defeat Voldemort. Frodo has to destroy the ring. With Paul it's kind of more vague and it makes it less interesting.
Well, I don't think we really saw the journey at all, because when they're attacked, a good chunk of the movie is them fighting back and escaping, right?
Yes.
So then they do escape, and we get just the tiniest, what feels like the tiniest snippet of like, okay, now I'm going to live among these people and ...
The Fremen.
Like, I guess he's going to avenge everyone, but he still isn't very clear. At least I didn't feel like it was clear from him telling me or showing me.
As a standalone film, it doesn't work. Like, it really doesn't work as its own. And I'm not saying like it doesn't work as the movie's an abject failure and falls apart. It's that it doesn't work as a narrative because it really does feel at the end like it's just like, oh, that's it. Okay.
It needs to rely on the second part.
Yes.
Fully.
You feel like, Paul's just killed somebody for the first time, which I remember the second time watching it, it didn't bother me as much. But the first time I remember thinking like, why is that? Like, it's a big deal to kill anybody, obviously, but for like, it was just like, oh, it's Paul's first kill. And that's where the movie's ending, as if it's like this big thing. And they kind of plant the idea of like, when you kill your past self and you're reborn. But it kind of all comes in that moment. Like they give you all that information in that one moment instead of building to it.
Yeah. And to me, it didn't really feel like a necessary death and a necessary fight.
Yes,
I get that they forced it
arbitrary,
and made it necessary, but that guy could have still been like, no, we're just not doing it.
Yeah, he was just kind of a punk, like,
and now
very bratty, and we're like, oh, well, I don't like this, so I'm gonna fight you to the death.
And the leader should have just put his foot down, but I guess you got to give Paul something to do a little bit towards the end.
It's in the book. I get it. It's a tough thing to do. I mean, the narrative on its own, Dune's narrative, is tough. So splitting it into two and having to introduce all this stuff and everything is certainly, like, I empathize and I admire what they've done to make it work. But also there's a lot of stuff where, like, when you get to the end and you're kind of like, oh, okay, that's it, I guess.
And I
feel that.
We did watch it again last night.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we did.
Which is the first time I'd seen it since 2021.
Or a couple nights ago.
I was I remember, you remember, because it was on HBO Max and I wanted to see it in IMAX. Then they took it out of theaters and I was like, well, I guess I have to watch it on HBO Max. And I watched it, and then the weekend after, they were like, it's back in IMAX.
Yeah.
And I was like, whatever. I tried. Denis, Christopher Nolan, please forgive me.
Yeah, so we did watch it again recently, and I'm thankful we did, because I will say my second viewing, as I thought, was much more enjoyable than my first. I did feel like I understood it a little better. I still struggled with some of the mythology and, the religious aspect and, where his mother came from. And there's some stuff I still don't think was fleshed out that I would have liked to see. But I did follow it along more. And I just overall, I did enjoy it better the second time. So I'm really curious to see if we're picking up right where we left off. I assume we are.
That's something too, where I would like to, after watching part 2, maybe go back, read the book again. Maybe I'll get more out of it. Cause I agree, watching part 1 again was good. That's another thing too, is like the religious aspect of the Kwisatz Haderach and introducing the idea of Paul as like, he's the one.
He's the Messiah.
Yeah, these are also these are story beats we've seen. And I know Dune pioneered this idea, and Star Wars owes a lot to Dune. But like, there is this feeling of like, I've seen this story already, and Dune isn't the most compelling version of that story, even if it was the pioneer. I think like Star Wars and Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings, these are all stories that have kind of been more interesting to me.
Yeah.
So it's a as a political thing, as a political piece that's used to manipulate, that's what's interesting about it. But they kind of present it in a confusing way, where it's one more layer on top of everything else in the movie. Like when he asks his mom, he's like, did she think I could be the one? Even them saying the one, it's like, oh, the Matrix, and like all the chosen one. Like you think about that, and it's like, oh, really? We have another story where there's a chosen one. But it's a little interesting because they're talking more about the idea of it and how it can be used politically to manipulate people. Because he embraces the idea that he could be their messiah, primarily as a means to gain their help to destroy his enemies.
Yeah. I would have liked to see more in that area, just kind of explaining more. I found it really interesting. There's only like almost not a throwaway sentence, but there's only like one sentence in there where they indicate that this is a plan that has been long in the making. They even selected their partners breeding wise, where it's like they literally like created children to try and get to this point by using very strong bloodlines. And to me, I was like, oh, so did she get with this guy for love, the Duke, or no? Or, you know, there's stuff like that I was
implied.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, because if it's like it was very calculated, his birth.
Yes.
And then also she's pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. I'm like, oh, okay, what?
Every time you bring something up, I'm just like, that's right. They throw that piece of information.
She's
like,
pregnant.
He's just like, oh, I know you're pregnant. She's like, you can't know that. Like,
but
then they never reference it really again.
Yeah.
so
there's little things. I'm like, are we gonna talk about this in part 2?
Yeah, it's very tough because you have to kind of take it as it is. But it's also part of the reason why I think like the idea of splitting into 2 parts, which was really, I guess, Deathly Hallows kind of. I mean, I know there are films like Back to the Future 2 and 3 were filmed back to back, but they were intended to be 2 separate films. Deathly Hallows was, I think, the first time where it was kind of like, hey, let's take this story, make it into 2 because we can make more money that way. But I was thinking about why narratively Deathly Hallows Part 1 works better for me than Dune Part 1. And I think a lot of it is because Harry Potter, by that point, we knew the characters, we'd gotten to that point, and so we're more willing to sit with that like kind of non-ending of a movie and then get what we get in Part 2. And similarly, that first part was like well received but kind of lukewarm, and then Part 2 was like very critically acclaimed. That's kind of what's happening with Dune as well. But Deathly Hallows Part 1 I just feel like was more emotionally fulfilling or emotionally engaging, and part of it was because we knew those characters, and whereas Dune is like introducing all these characters, introducing a lot of information, and then it just stops.
Yeah, I wasn't rooting for any character in this movie per se, and I do feel like as a viewer I personally maybe needed a little more of that to feel more engaged. There were just characters that like Gurney.
Mm-hmm. Who Josh Brolin's great.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
And Javier Bardem shows up briefly and is great. Like,
everyone's so good. I'm like, I want more time with them,
yes.
but we still got like a 2.5 hour movie,
it's
right?
True. Well, Jason Momoa, so Duncan Idaho as a character, he's great, and he imbues it with a lot of his personal charm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like kind of tossed off humor that's definitely not in the book. Like, I don't remember the book being very funny. It is very, very serious. But like a lot of stuff like, oh, you've been working out. Is that some muscle there? He's like, you built some muscle? I did? No. Like things like that where, smile, Gurney. I am smiling. Like very almost Marvel type humor. But Jason Momoa brings a lot of that charm to the character. But even then, and even with the movie telling us like, this is a person you should care about, when he gets killed, it feels like it's supposed to be a big emotional moment. Yeah. But it doesn't feel like, it's kind of like, oh, okay. Yeah. It's like maybe if he died in Part 2, like if that was a scene that had taken place in Part 2, we had a little bit more time with these characters, it would have meant more. And I appreciate like the sacrifice he's making, but also it's just kind of like they play it as like this amazing defining moment for the character, and it's just kind of like, whatever. There's a lot of stuff like that in this movie where I'm like, I feel like I should be feeling more, and I don't feel anything.
Yeah, and on the flip side, when you're with Paul and his mother, and every time someone dies, they're like, oh, they're dead.
Yes, there's no emotion.
Because they feel it, I guess, through the whatever magic system that's built into this movie
the
slash
forest
book.
Or whatever.
Yeah, the spice that gives them heightened emotions, I guess, or something like that.
There's a nice scene
Again,
between...
there's still not a lot. I'm like, what is this movie? Very sandy. That
Yes,
was my...
Paul and Jessica do have a nice scene in the tent where he kind of like breaks down and has that moment. But overall, like, I think it's an interesting movie, and I'm more excited to see part 2. And honestly, I keep joking about it, but it's true. I don't remember much of what happens in this part of the book, partly because I just didn't care when I was reading it. So I'm very interested, and also a lot of people who were lukewarm about part 1 have been like, oh my God, part 2 is like, the Two Towers or The Empire Strikes Back or blah, blah, like very, very high acclaim. So I'm kind of like, all right, let's see how this goes. I am very excited.
That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping we just get more dimension to some of these characters, and I think the stakes are going to be higher, which is good. I hope the stakes are higher.
I hope, yeah.
It seems like they are. But yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, again, like, the cast is so incredible.
God.
The director,
He's great.
the music. We haven't talked the music.
Music's
I
amazing.
really loved. It's Hans Zimmer,
Yes.
right? Yeah, so good. Like, what a good soundtrack. But yeah, I'm very excited. Again, I'm glad we watched this again recently, so it
Yes.
can be a little more fresh in my mind, and I have more of a like appreciation. I'm like, oh, I did like that. Whereas the first time I was like, I don't know how I felt,
Yeah.
because I was very excited for it. I remember it's hard when you get really pumped up for a movie and then it's just kind of lukewarm, and you're like, how do I feel?
Yeah.
So for this movie, my expectations are a lot lower, but I hear really good things.
Yes,
So I'm getting
yeah.
really excited.
Same. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go watch it, and then we'll discuss on the drive home. It gives
Yeah.
us something to do while we're driving, while we're stuck in traffic.
Now available to own on video cassette.
All right, we're back. We've just seen Dune Part 2 in IMAX. Did you experience it in IMAX, Sarah? Do you feel experienced?
Yeah, I feel the power.
Let's say I got duned. I got doomed.
Okay.
There's sand in places I don't want to talk about. That's how I feel right now. But yeah, I definitely, so better than the first one.
Yes,
For sure.
I really had a fun time with
Yes,
it.
and it definitely helps that now you get the full picture. Even having read the book, I'm like, oh, that's right. That's why these things happen, and that's why these events and certain character choices are important. They kind of, some of them come to fruition, but there's also a little bit of there's more to come at the end.
Yeah,
So.
I think that what we were talking about with Dune 1 is that, everyone was a little one-dimensional, not a lot of character growth, but in this one, I feel like every single person got a good arc. Like,
Yes.
they had a journey. But I really liked it. I really liked it.
It was stronger on an emotional level, and I think what really helps is in part 1 of Dune, so somebody coming to that story as a newbie, not having read the book, not really knowing much about this world or its characters, you do kind of leave part 1 with this sense of like, okay, but so what? Like, what's going on? Like, where are we going? You get the sense that Paul is going to avenge his father. There's this religious aspect that's a little confusing, but I do remember getting to the end of part 1 and thinking like, well, I don't even remember what happened. I don't know exactly what this is supposed to be culminating at. And Paul, for the most part, is a relatively passive character in part 1. He's kind of at the mercy of a lot of the events that are happening, which I think makes it a little, it kind of exacerbates those feelings of like, why do I care about Paul? What's the point? What is he going to do? Who is he? Why is he the chosen one? And with part 2, because the advantage of having gotten all the introductions out of the way is you kind of just kick right off and immediately you have this sense of like, okay, I understand who Paul is and what he's trying to do. I understand what Jessica's trying to do. I understand these other characters like Chani and what's his name, Stilgard. All these people, you get a better sense of who they are. Part 2 really delves into their humanity, and understand kind of the political motivations with like all this religious stuff with the Bene Gesserit. It all kind of culminates. So it really does what like the second half of the story is supposed to do.
Yes.
Which is really the biggest flaw of part one, is that it felt very much not like a standalone movie. This oddly, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I feel like this works a little better on its own than Dune 1 did.
I agree. I think you kind of have all three acts in this movie.
Yeah, that's it. It doesn't
yeah.
feel like it's Act 1, Act 2, and then just in Act 3.
Yeah.
Or Act 2 and 3. It does feel like a more fully formed movie, weirdly enough.
No, I agree. It, you know, obviously at the end, they allude to what's coming next. But even with that, where you know, okay, they're probably going to do more movies, they're going to keep following the books, whatnot. It still feels like the end of the chapter has closed, in a sense, so you could never watch them again and you still got a full movie.
Yeah, you've come to a good, as far as like Paul's journey is concerned, you've come to a good stopping point where you're like, okay, this is an ending to the story that we've been watching. And you get, you know, there's still more to come, obviously. There's, you know, all the other houses are
The Holy
going
War.
to, yeah, the Holy War is coming, like all this insanity. And I know nothing about the future of the, I don't know anything about the future of House Atreides. I know nothing. But I'm trying to think about the book itself and what's different and what's changed and what's the same. I think, again, there's a lot of stuff that the movie just has an advantage over the book in that you can really show a lot of this stuff. It can kind of bring context to the story, where you're reading something on a page and sometimes it's like, I don't know what this is. It's just a bunch of words that are confusing. But I feel like there are emotional beats in the movie that I don't recall in the book. I remember the book being pretty, not stale, but not engaging emotionally. It's kind of cold. It's very focused on these political machinations and manipulations and all this stuff, to the point where you're kind of like, I don't know how I feel about Paul. I don't know how I feel about Jessica. I think the movie, through the performances and through some script moments too, because I know Chani was obviously in the book, but I don't remember their romance being as defined as it was in this film. Like, I feel like they certainly amped it up a bit.
Yeah, and I feel like Chani kind of takes the place of the audience's reactions a lot.
Yeah, she's the audience surrogate for sure.
Yeah, she's kind of the one going, okay, are you sure this is the direction we should be going?
Yeah.
And, you know, kind of like the little Jiminy Cricket
Yeah,
on the shoulder
being
of
the
his character.
conscience.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, because at the end of it, I'm just kind of like, oh gosh, I don't know who I'm rooting for here.
And
I'm feeling a little icky.
I felt that way too, getting to the end of the book. I was
Yeah.
like, who am I supposed to be rooting for? It's kind of...
I was kind of Team Chani at the end there.
Yes.
I was like, all right, girl, like,
And-
got you.
and I don't know if that's where it goes.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff, honestly, I don't remember happening at all in the book. I know I've already said I didn't remember the second half, but the things I definitely don't remember. Like, I don't remember Florence Pugh, whatever her character's name is. I don't remember
The
her,
Empress's daughter.
Yeah, the
Emperor's daughter.
Yeah, the Emperor's daughter. I don't remember her being there during the fight, and I don't remember in the book him declaring he's going to marry her. That could be in there, and maybe I'm just wrong, but it felt like there was some stuff, maybe like from Dune Messiah, that they were specifically alluding to, like Chani kind of leaving at the end, feeling betrayed. I don't remember that in the book, so I wonder. I know Dune Messiah, the sequel, is supposed to kind of, in a way, wrap up this story
Okay.
before it time jumps to Children of Dune, and then you have a next generation of Atreides and Harkonnens. And I didn't remember at all that Paul was half Harkonnen. Again,
Yeah.
that's probably me, but also I don't recall it in the book, so I wonder if it was in Dune Messiah. I don't know. I'm not the person to ask.
I feel like that's a big thing that they wouldn't just put in there if it wasn't in one of the books.
Yes,
but,
for sure.
yeah.
For sure.
I thought that was a great twist.
I'm sure it was in there, and I was just bored reading. just at that point glazed over, just like, I gotta get through this. I gotta see the movie in a couple months, and then it was delayed anyway. But yeah, and then but I also think the sister was born in the book, in the first book, his sister, because she's there. I'm pretty sure she becomes an actual physical presence. Like, there's a time jump near the end of the book Dune, and I'm almost positive that Paul's sister has a more significant role to play.
Well, they're gonna have a hard time aging Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah, that's the question too. Is they've already presented like Anya Taylor-Joy as his sister.
Yeah.
I can't remember if she ages faster, the baby. Maybe I'm crazy.
Well, who cares?
Maybe
we'll
I'm
figure it out
mixing
later.
sci-fi. Yeah, we'll find out later. It's almost better that I don't know anything.
Yeah.
Even
you can
having
go into
read
the next one
Well,
surprised.
the downside is I probably will go back and reread it now because I'm super curious about the other books, and I hear they take a nosedive after Frank Herbert passes away, and I also hear they take a nosedive. Some people think after the third book. Some people really love the fourth book, which is God Emperor of Dune. I literally know nothing. I just know that personally, what I struggled with the book Dune was just the lack of interesting characterizations. They're all very kind of like stoic and straightforward. One thing I think the movie did a really good job of was really hammering home the idea of, and again, I have already expressed that I'm a terrible person at reading books, so maybe this is already there, but I felt it more strongly and more specifically in the movie. The idea of like the religious manipulation, and using that as a tool. That was in the book too, but I guess seeing it displayed and seeing it visually and seeing Paul's relationship with his mother, it felt a little bit more in the book like Paul was like, yeah, that's what I gotta do. I gotta do it. And in this one, he feels more in conflict. He feels more like struggling with his decisions. I don't remember that as much in the book. I don't remember him having as much of like an emotional journey in the book. I think that was my big problem with it.
Yeah.
Does anything ring cold to you in the movie? Like, you were pretty emotionally engaged with it.
I was, yeah. I really enjoyed it. I feel conflicted about Paul right now, and that's a little like unsettling because. So for part one, I was like, okay, interesting, but you're a little one-dimensional. I want to see where this goes. Part two, I started getting attached to him, and he became more two-dimensional, and he had something to fight for.
He's not three-dimensional yet. He's only two-dimensional.
He's only two.
To be fair, it is a movie screen, so it is a flat image.
Well, I'm going to stick with my two-dimensional comment, because I don't know if he's achieved 3 yet. We will see.
It's true.
That might be for part 3.
Yes.
But I feel like, we started getting more stakes. He became more humanized through his romantic relationship with Shawn.
There's a love story in this one.
He trains. He becomes one with
he
the desert
rides a worm.
people. Like, you're like, oh, the hero's journey. Like, I'm getting it.
But
so
no one says desert power in this movie, which really upset me.
I guess so.
They do talk. There was a point where I think Gurney was like, this is what your father was talking about with Arrakis. Real, true power. And I was like, just say it. Say desert power. Everyone's dying to say it, but nobody said it. But yeah, you're right. There's an actual hero's journey.
Yeah.
And of course, go ahead.
Because of that, I started feeling really conflicted when he started assuming the mantle of the prophet. Because, during this whole film, he is very resistant. He's like, I do not want that. I just want to help free Arrakis. I want to get the terrible power out of there.
It's a means to an end for him. It's not necessarily something that he wants to he doesn't want to manipulate these people.
No, and he does truly love Chani. And he, we talked about this, but he says to her, I will love you till my last breath. I will love you until I'm dead. She says, I will love you as long as you stay true to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And what do we see? Well, her version of him staying true to himself is rejecting that mantle. And that is his point of view for all of the movie until the last 30 minutes, right? And then he's like, nope, I am the Messiah. I saw the future. This is the only way I can do it.
Once he drinks the worm juice,
and
he
obviously
becomes officially the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah. And I mean, he does say something interesting, which I'm wondering how they're going to work her back in. Because obviously Chani leaves at the end. She does not want to bow to his power. She's done. She's betrayed. He's marrying the emperor's daughter. But he says, I think to Gurney, she will come to understand. And I took that as like, he knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I do think that she will come around, but I'm really curious about how they'll get there, because that was a really big breach of trust between the two of them.
Yes.
And I felt like her character, I felt a little betrayed by him. I don't know if he was doing the right thing or the wrong thing, but it didn't feel like maybe completely true to his character.
Well,
like,
in a way, he knew what he would become once he kicks off this chain of events. And he knows that what he does is going to lead to destruction and like terrible tyranny and suffering. And, you know, I don't think Dune, in a way, it's not the hero's journey you expect. It's not a situation where Luke Skywalker it's the good guy and he wins the battle at the end of the day. It's a scenario in which it's more of a Godfather, like a tragic story, where it's like this innocent mind that wants to do the right thing ends up corrupted by power, and it is destroyed ultimately by that power.
I don't know. I'm curious to see how I'll feel, because if you start removing those shreds of humanity, I usually start getting disinterested and like I need something to hang on to.
Right.
Personally. So I'm wondering if Chani will remain that person, or...
I think Paul and Jessica's relationship and their story in the book just isn't as... I didn't get the sense of why they were doing it, whereas here I felt like I understood a little bit more. But I also think, you know, it's in a sense, they are attempting to gain the ultimate power. Like, but why? What are you going to do with that power? And I'm very curious to read more and to see how that develops.
Yeah, I wonder what your opinion will be on the book going back to it, having now seen the film.
I think I'll enjoy it more. But even Lord of the Rings, which is like, you know, my favorite books, favorite movies, I needed to see the movie before I could read the book and be like, I get it. Okay, I understand. And even reading The Two Towers and The Return of the King before those movies, out of like just reading them on the page didn't excite me as much as seeing the movie. I'm just a film person first and foremost. I tend to engage more emotionally with what I'm seeing and hearing, and just on that level I tend to engage more with art. So it makes sense that this, like, you know, I kind of expected Dune to sort of win me over in film form. I also feel like people are comparing Dune to Lord of the Rings in some ways. And we talked about this a little bit. I want to bring this up. The idea of like the battle sequences. Mm-hmm. And this is what I hate. And this is nobody's fault except that somebody tweeted this online and that got picked up by marketing. But a lot of people are like, yeah, the battle sequences are on the scale of like, you know, the Two Towers or something. And watching this, I didn't feel that at all. And especially like Helm's Deep is kind of the cream of the crop when it comes to cinematic film, like battle sequences. I didn't get that sense. I enjoyed the fights, but I didn't get a sense of like that.
I got more Battle of the Brothers from Game of Thrones. Battle of the Brothers. Do you remember that episode?
Oh yeah.
Or the Battle of the Two Brothers.
Battle of the Bastards.
Bastards. Whoops. Yeah. Can we say that? But yeah, like I think the hand-to-hand combat was exceptional.
Yes.
Like the choreography kicked up in this film. Like whoever was choreographing, like the fight scenes, I thought they were so good. They were brutal.
Right.
Like this is definitely more of a violent movie than part one.
Yeah.
There's more opportunity for violence though, naturally, like with the war. But yeah, I would say Lord of the Rings is like the top. I don't know what can touch it.
Well, I think story-wise too, it's the battle of like all the odds are against them, and you've done so much to build up these battles. And in this movie, it's more like, oh, they just blew up the thing. Oh, they rode up on the sandworms and just completely dominated. Like, there's not much at stake. I guess that's the difference for me, is like Lord of the Rings, I feel what's at stake. And in Dune, it's more like, oh, these guys are badasses. It's unfair to compare all these different franchises. Part of why I think I didn't enjoy Dune on its own terms is because I am comparing it to things like Lord of the Rings in my brain, and I'm like, oh, I want to feel like
Well, just
an
don't
emotion.
do that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, that's the lesson I've
Yeah.
learned, or I'm trying to learn, is like, it's okay. We don't have to compare them.
Yeah.
I guess it, on a level of like, if you want to say like, this is at what Dune is like, as far as scale and da-da-da, because we say, when Lord of the Rings came out, it was comparing to Akira Kurosawa films, it's like you have that means of comparison just to say like, that's the kind of grand scale we're talking about. I think what I'm missing from Dune is the emotional story, but it's also like, that's okay, because what's interesting about Dune is not so much emotional content as the philosophical content, as the idea of religion and politics merging and why that's dangerous and what can happen when the wrong people get power of those ideas. And that's a different idea than what Tolkien was doing. There's a reason Tolkien didn't like Dune. You can understand why Tolkien, as a Catholic, would not like a story about like why religion is essentially a farce and used for power purposes. Yeah. Exactly. But that's what's interesting about Dune. And watching the movies finally kind of, that hit home for me in a way I didn't get reading the book. Were there favorite scenes of yours from the movie that you enjoyed more than others? Favorite characters? Austin Butler, is he the best?
Yeah, it took me 5 solid minutes, and then I went, "That's Elvis."
Yes. Yeah.
I was like, when he's bald and has no eyebrows and very pale, he looks like a different person.
You would think he would be recognizable, but.
And then I was like, oh, that's why he was on the red carpet. Like, I just did not put it together.
Yes.
And I kind of laughed. I was like, oh, duh. What were my favorite moments?
Sandworms.
The sandworms. Like,
yes, they're always the best.
Yeah, I really loved when Paul rode the grandpa sandworm for the first time.
Granddaddy.
Yep, great granddaddy. I thought that was really cool.
Javier Bardem just being like, oh, he's the guy. He's the one.
Yeah.
He's the Messiah.
Every time he's like, see guys, I told you.
Every time something happened. There's a meme that I've been seeing that I didn't quite understand, but like there's just a meme like Paul just like does things like pretending he's chopping his finger in half, and Javier Bardem's like, he's the one. He's the, like just doing magic tricks and stuff. Like, oh, that's him.
Yeah, I really enjoyed most of the people in this film. I mean, I thought everyone was really great. I really liked Chani.
Yeah, Zendaya's awesome.
Zendaya's the best. Like, I'll just fangirl over her all day.
Yeah,
I think she's so talented. I really love her. Let me
fangirl over Timothée Chalamet for a minute, because I think Paul is a pretty thankless role.
Yeah.
I think the struggle with Paul on the page is he's not that interesting. So you have to I think Timothée Chalamet is kind of just immediately likable. Like he has that kind of likability where you're kind of, even though you might not necessarily be super into the character of Paul, like in the first part you're kind of like, who is this kid? Like, what? I don't know. There's this kind of inherent likability that he demonstrates that he sort of wins you over, and then when he's like throwing fast punches and curveballs at you and you're like, wait a second, what the hell is going on? It's a little bit more like, I'm still willing to go on this journey with you because I still like you. Almost like Bryan Cranston as Walter White. Mm. You're like, I
like an
hate
anti-hero.
you, but I love you.
Yeah.
I feel that with Timothée Chalamet's performance. And it's tough because you're basically playing a guy who is like a young man becoming a master manipulator, essentially. And it's a tough character to play when you're kind of like, I'm the Messiah, and we're still supposed to want to be like following this guy's exploits. And I think they kind of play at the reluctant hero bit a little bit, which I don't know if that was in the book as much. I think he was a little bit more gung-ho in the book, like, yeah, we're gonna do this and it's gonna happen. But I think that makes him really lovable.
Yeah,
maybe not lovable, but likable.
What a guy.
What a guy. I love Timothy. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, he is wonderful. I agree. Just his character is pretty soft-spoken for a lot of the movie, or especially the first one. And then, when the shift in power happens, it's visceral. Like, he's yelling. He's, like, physically commanding a presence, mm-hmm. which I wasn't really seeing from his character until that point. So I think it really packed a punch. And it was like, oh no, the rules of the game have changed. Yeah. From here on, it's something different. And I thought as an audience member, like his physical performance was really powerful too.
That's what always impresses me about him. Is he's such a he's like a skinny, dweeby-looking dude, but he has this power in him that
I don't think he's dweeby. Like, I think he's got it. I don't know what it is.
I mean, him in general, but you've seen interviews where he's kind of like geeking out and just happy. He's genuinely happy to be doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I mean dweeby in that way, where it's like you like, oh, this kid's so cute, and you don't necessarily think of him as like, oh, he's gonna tear somebody a new one. So it's like when he reminds you of just how powerful of a performer he is, it's like he has. And
his range is incredible.
Yes.
I mean, in this movie and in all his movies.
Right. We just saw him in Wonka, which was great.
Yeah. And I just like, I don't know. I love seeing what he's done. I love seeing what he'll do next. He was in a play with John Patrick Shanley is an actual, like, he's a college roommate of my dad's, and he wrote a play called The Prodigal Son. So when Timothée Chalamet was like 15, something like that, was a young kid.
He was the lead.
He played.
We have a Kevin Bacon connection with Timothée Chalamet.
So my dad's character, my uncle, they were all characters in this play off Broadway, I think. And he was in that, and it was just so cool. And I don't think anyone knew his name yet. It was before everything. It was before Call Me by Your Name, which I feel
that was like his big shoot to stardom,
exactly. And it's just so cool to see where he is now. And I'm like, man, you're still in your 20s. Like,
he's
what else are you going to give us?
It's great.
It's so exciting.
It is, and I think that performance is really, really strong. I think Rebecca Ferguson is great. There's a lot of like weirder stuff. Like the movie starts to get weirder, which I like.
Yeah.
Like
I want more space travel. Like, am I going to get more space travel?
Yeah.
Because I know that's a thing.
I was a little disappointed, I think, reading Dune for the first time to feel like it's all this desert planet.
Where's the water?
Yeah, where's the sci-fi? I
want more space.
I want things to blow up in spaceships. But I don't know. I really don't. I think I would really love to read the other books to find out more about what happens. What else did I love? I think Dave Bautista is great. Bill Skarsgård is amazing. Like, just as whatever the guy's name, Baron Harkonnen. Lea Seydoux shows up for a minute and she's great. Anya Taylor-Joy shows up for a minute and she's great. And all these people are great. What a great cast of people! Wonderful, beautiful people that I will pay to see more movies. I miss Oscar Isaac though.
Yeah, when do you think they'll announce that they're moving forward with the third movie?
It had a really strong opening weekend, and I think they were waiting to see how it would do this weekend. And it has legs this weekend, because there was like Kung Fu Panda 4 came out, which is dominating the box office, but Dune held its own. So I think it's pretty likely we're going to see a sequel. I think there's like some franchise milking that is possible. But what concerns me is just you don't hear a lot of people who are super excited about anything really past the third or fourth book. That's where I get a little concerned.
I wonder if they did decide to move forward, which I think it sounds like they will.
I think so.
Maybe they'll do like they'll announce a 3 and 4, and then that's the end of the story. And they might film them back to back or something like that, and then they'll just close out Paul's story and not move forward with the children, whatever, of the Dune.
Right.
I don't know, what is it?
Well, Dune Messiah is much shorter than Dune. Dune Messiah, apparently, originally Frank Herbert intended that was supposed to be an epilogue to Dune. And then it just got so expansive that he was like, I guess I'll just publish it as its own book. But it's a shorter book. I don't know if you can get away with splitting it, but who knows? I mean, you can split anything. I mean, they split Mockingjay, they split Breaking Dawn, where absolutely nothing happens, and either until the very, very end, in a scene that wasn't even in the book. But yeah, I mean, there are ways. I'm sure Denis Villeneuve will do what's best for the material. I will read it and hopefully know more about it so I can figure out how I feel about not only the book itself, but whether or not it should be split into more than one part. But is there anything else?
I just really liked it. Again, same thing. I want to watch it again.
Yes.
As the first time, except I'm more excited to watch it.
Right.
Whereas before I was like, part 1 was
more
fine.
excited and definitely more invested, like feel a little bit more investment and like, oh yeah, I want to see where this goes.
Yeah, I want to see what I'll pick up on a second viewing that I maybe didn't pick up on
and
this
also,
time.
Yeah.
But it was just, again, what a beautiful movie. That man can make a visually stunning film.
Yeah, it's great. Greg Fraser, who was the cinematographer, and
Yeah.
just everything about the
Excellent.
production, design, costume, everything is so beautiful. I'm very excited. I think it's really, really cool. Dune, I think in a weird way, like as a runaway success as a book, considering what the story is, and also the movies having a level of success is really fascinating to me. Like, it's a weird thing that Warner Brothers is like, yeah, our big franchise is going to be Dune, because it's weird and it's not conventional, and like I guess like it's a little bit closer to Game of Thrones, but even Game of Thrones has like, oh, there's nudity and like insane violence and gore, which I think is kind of what they had in their back pocket to keep people coming in. Dune is just kind of unabashedly weird and very interesting, but like I think that's super cool. And a filmmaker like Denis Villeneuve, who's made some weird movies that are relatively unconventional, like Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 are not remotely like crowd-pleasing blockbusters. So it is very, very cool that he's involved, that he's made these movies, that they seem to be very much like his vision, and that they're enjoying a level of success. I think as far as blockbusters in the 21st century are concerned, that's definitely a good thing. When more and more of them are feeling very kind of like, meh, it's nice to kind of see this and like, oh, this guy got $200+ million and made something really striking and memorable and effective. So that's cool. I want to see more. I want to read more. So that's what will happen. Sadly, there were no desert powers in the movie. I mean, there's a lot of desert power, like display of desert power, but nobody said it. But let's just say the phrase desert power, how many desert powers would you give Dune Part 2? Dune and, let's say Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2.
Okay, so Part 1, I'm sitting at a 3.
Okay.
Part 2, I'm at like a 4.25. I'll give it a little tip up.
Wow.
I don't know if I can go 5, but like
Yeah.
I think it's a little more than a 4 for me. I
So,
really liked it.
Yeah, Dune Part 1 is a 3.5, and this one I think is a 4. And I think if I see it again, I might be persuaded to bump it up a little bit. It's a great movie. Go see it.
Go see
And
it, so
that's-
we can get Part 3.
So we
I
can
wanna,
get,
I
I
need
would
to
love.
know. I gotta
for
get
sure.
into this this holy war thing. I gotta find out about what's
that.
going on.
Yeah, I'm super curious about that. So we will do that. Well, thank you, my darling, my dearest, and thank you everybody for listening. And we will see you at the movies.